Welcome to the Bible's Greatest Mysteries from Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I am Sharon Gilbert, and we're delighted that you've chosen to join us once again, and I bet you are anxious to hear what Aaron Lipkin has to say next.
Oh, yes, we've got some fascinating things that we've learned from Aaron during our time with him. He not only is a fan of archaeology, as are we, but he also coordinates our tours of Israel, which means when you go with Skywatch TV to Israel, you see some things that other tours just don't visit.
Well, speaking of Israel, guess what I've got?
Oh, another assignment from Tom Horn?
I've got the bag of stuff, yes. And, well, Tom, he's always digging into the news. And if you want to know the stuff that he picks out, boy, he finds some great news stories. Go to skywatchtv.com. Well, he gave us some news stories to talk about. Oh, my gosh, Hezekiah's tunnels re-examined?
This is a famous site. We've seen this on our tours.
We've gone through it a couple of times.
Yes. This was the tunnel that Hezekiah dug to provide water for Jerusalem during the siege by the Assyrians.
You know, the amazing thing about this tunnel, to me, is not only that it was, they were able to actually construct it, because as you walk through, you realize this is beautifully done. But it was two teams. One started at one end, the other at the other end, and they met in the middle.
That's really remarkable. And a day before precise surveying equipment, or GPS for that matter.
And they're kind of curved. It's not like a straight line.
Right.
I don't really know how they managed to do that, but to me, it's a miracle.
Well, they're calling this a redating of the tunnel because there have been questions. Archaeologists, many of whom are what they call minimalists, who don't believe that many of the sites located by archaeologists over the past 100 years in the Holy Land are really the biblical sites that are described.
So we're going to redate them just so we don't have to believe anymore.
Or exactly.
It makes me feel oogie if I realize there's a God out
Well,
there.
that's one of the reasons there's a question about when Joshua and the Israelites went into Canaan, because many still believe in a late date, 12th century or 13th century, with Ramses the Great being the pharaoh of the Exodus. But when you look, yes, Yul Brynner. But when you look at the destruction of the cities that Joshua and the Israelites were supposed to have destroyed, you don't find those destruction layers dated to that time period. So because the evidence on the ground doesn't fit the chronology, the evidence must be wrong, instead of saying maybe we need to recalibrate our chronology.
Well, exactly. I mean, good science means that you go with the data.
Yeah.
You don't go in and say, I'm going to prove my bias.
And sadly, that's what a lot of us tend to do. I've got a certain chronology in my mind for when Abraham must have lived, and therefore everything that we find on the ground must fit that, or it's not right.
It's done in science all the time. But boy, this tunnel, you can go through this tunnel with us, by the way, when we go to Israel next, which will be in March of 2022. Go to skywatchandisrael.com and you read all about it.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting bits of evidence here that is really important is that the rubble fill, which blocked the entrance to one of the tunnels that Hezekiah dug for this aqueduct, date to the late 9th and early 8th century BC, which is about 100 years before Hezekiah and the Assyrians, which means that the earlier date, rather than those who were skeptics and said, no, this dates to the Hasmonean period, which is 2nd century BC, 600 years later, it appears that those who attribute this to Hezekiah were, in fact, correct.
Oh, my goodness. Well, this article references a book called Excavating the City of David. That sounds like a book you and I need to get and read.
It does. The City of David is just filled with archaeology, and that's one of the sites, of course, on the tour. We've been blessed to see it twice now. You go underneath the modern area where you can get the snacks and the ice cream, and you go down into the areas that have been excavated by archaeologists and see these buildings that date back to the time of Hezekiah and Isaiah, Jeremiah, and even earlier, back to the time of David.
Yes, where some of the bullae and some of the seals have been discovered that would go on documents, these bits of clay that have sometimes names that relate to David.
And there have been some that have been found that relate to other biblical characters like Hezekiah, like Josiah, or Hosea, I guess is more correct. But this is one of the things that we find so exciting about archaeology. As Christians, or as Jews for that matter, we have in our hands, even though the Bible is not predominantly or primarily a book of history, archaeologists, even today in the 21st century, are finding that many of their discoveries are guided by clues in Scripture. the Bible is an accurate history in the historical details that it records, understanding, of course, that all of this was in service of sharing spiritual truth.
Yes. Well, there's another story that I think really is quite interesting, and you and I can relate to this story because we've been in that area. The temple on Mount Gerizim. There have been archaeological digs there, and it's a mysterious sort of place. But where did this temple come from? It's not mentioned in the Bible.
That really is interesting. Presumably, if it's Mount Gerizim, we would assume that this was built by the Samaritans after their return from the Assyrian captivity.
You would assume so, but here's my question. Is this the right Mount Gerizim?
That is the question, because as we discussed a few weeks ago with Aaron Lipkin in the program about Joshua's altar, one of the reasons skeptics have denied that site is, in fact, Joshua's altar, is that it's on the east side of Mount Ebal, which means Mount Gerizim would be on the east side of the valley north of the city of Shechem.
It's a different mountain.
Yes, whereas the current Mount Gerizim, or the peak that's called Mount Gerizim, where the modern Samaritan community lives, is south of the city. So it would suggest that the modern community may be on the wrong mountain.
Spiritually speaking, that whole area is ancient and filled with all sorts of entities.
Yes. It was clearly an important location going back to the time of Abraham, because it was there at the Oak of Moreh that God appeared to him and said, your descendants will inherit this land. It was there at the Oak of Moreh where Jacob buried the teraphim that Rachel had stolen from his father-in-law Laban.
That place was probably a ritual site that the Lord was taking control of, taking it away from the small g gods, the Elohim. I was flying here, that were trying to take over what really was the Lord's land.
Well, the temple that they found that was just written about recently, they believe was built during the Persian period, so 5th century BC, about the time that the temple was being rebuilt by Nehemiah.
You know, speaking of things that have been discovered recently that you didn't expect to find, is Sisera's fortress.
Oh, yes, Sisera, who was the leader of the army of the Canaanite king of Hazor.
It is pronounced Sisera, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it looks like Sisera. But he wasn't from the land.
No, that was one of the things that the archaeologist Adam Zertal discovered when he began to excavate that site. And so we'll talk about that with Aaron Lipkin as we discuss the discovery of Sisera's fortress next on the Bible's Greatest Mysteries.
Call now and take advantage of Skywatch TV's most groundbreaking deal of the year. With the rediscovery of the ancient prophecies from a mysterious group of prophets and scribes hundreds of years before Christ, your understanding of end times prophecy and the final age of man is about to be forever changed. In Josh Peck's new book, The Lost Prophecies of Qumran, the veil is lifted as you discover how much of what you've been taught about Israel in the first century is incomplete. Shockingly, there were Jewish believers who knew exactly what to expect from the coming Messiah. That he would be God in the flesh, would die for our sins, and even the date of his first arrival. In Josh Peck's new book, The Lost Prophecies of Qumran, you will discover lost prophecies only recently discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls about the time we are now living in. How the enigmatic group known as the Essenes formed and what influence they had on the New Testament. What hidden feasts and festivals the Essenes celebrated. And what messages the group left behind for believers living in the present age. How the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation fit within the Essene timetable. And how an ancient Jewish calendar actually predicts the prophetic significance of the year 2025. But that's not all. For the first time ever, you'll also receive Dr. Ken Johnson's massive 3-book collection entitled The Ancient Mysteries of the Essenes, where Dr. Johnson compiles 3 of his most groundbreaking research studies on the Dead Sea Scrolls into one massive collection. In Book 1, The Ancient Dead Sea Scrolls Calendar and the Prophecies it Reveals, you will discover the secrets of the mysterious 364-day calendar used by the ancients since the time of creation and how it has been hidden until now for the appointed time. In Book 2, Ancient Testimonies of the Patriarchs, Autobiographies from the Dead Sea Scrolls, you will hear the previously hidden prophetic texts of such patriarchs as Enos, grandson of Adam, Lamech, father of Noah, Amram, father of Moses and Aaron, and even Enoch from the Book of Enoch fame. And in the most shocking revelation yet, Book 3, The Ancient Order of Melchizedek, you will learn astonishing facts about the enigmatic priest Melchizedek, such as why his priesthood was and is different from that of Levi, why the Messiah was ordained after the order of Melchizedek, and how the facts surrounding this mysterious order dramatically affect the theology and practical applications of our Christian walk today. This collection is an absolute necessity for any researcher's library, and for those who want to fully step into the minds of the ancients and see the Dead Sea Scrolls like they never have before. Now you can get this incredible collection for your donation of only $35 plus shipping and handling. So don't miss out on Skywatch TV's most groundbreaking deal of the year, the Lost Prophecies and Ancient Mysteries Collection, available now at skywatchtvstore.com. Order now or call 1-844-750-4985.
The Bible's Greatest Mysteries is part of Skywatch TV, a viewer-supported ministry. Every show is available on demand at the Skywatch TV app for Roku, Apple TV, and our free mobile app. Follow us online at skywatchtv.com. It's the Bible's Greatest Mysteries. I'm Derek Gilbert. Joining us in studio, the CEO of Lipkin Tours, the publisher of a number of books based on the work, by the late Israeli archaeologist Adam Zertal, and producer of the Hidden Israel series of DVDs. This time around, we're talking about Sisera's Secret by Professor Adam Zertal. We welcome Aaron Lipkin back to the program. Aaron, thank you for joining us. You took us in 2019 to the site of Sisera's fortress, a site called El-Ahwat in Israel. And we could tell that this was not on the normal tours because it was the only place we visited during both of our trips where the sign was only in Hebrew, not in Hebrew, English, and Arabic, and it was kind of hanging from the sign. It looked very forlorn. We had to go past a fence that was kind of partly knocked down to get to the site. But your tour guides, Yeshai Abatal and Kuti Ben David, were very excited about taking us to this place because it's not something they normally get to see.
Right.
What is unique about El-Ahwat, and why did Adam Zertal find it so interesting?
Well, first of all, Adam Zertal and his crew, and let's put it in the context, the archaeological context, they did an emergency survey of the regions of Samaria, and specifically the tribal land of Manasseh and Ephraim. These areas were really uncharted for hundreds of years. Nobody really knew all of the extent of the archaeological sites that were there. And during that survey, they found this site called El-Ahwat, which means in Arabic, the walls. And for a bystander, it looks like these terraces, nothing special about them. But for an archaeologist, when you're seeing this, you're seeing an archaeological tale. You're seeing a place that you would really like to excavate. Nobody excavated there, and because this was, according to the pottery that was found there on the surface from the Iron Age period. This is something that really made Adam Zertal curious. And Adam Zertal excavated the Joshua's altar. He excavated the footprint structures that we spoke about a few weeks back. So for Adam Zertal, Iron Age means I want to be there, I want to check it out. And he started excavating there, and he was really surprised because at first he thought that he might be excavating an Israelite site. And we know from excavations that were done that Israelite sites have certain criterias that define them as Israelite. For example, most of the houses or all of the houses are 4-room houses. Israelites only lived in 4-room houses for many centuries. There are different theories why they did that, but that was the typical Israelite architecture. And when Adam Zertal is excavating in that city, in that town, he sees that the houses are not at all 4-room houses. Now, the excavations were done also in other places in Israel, in Canaanite cities, and again, the Canaanite cities, do have four-room houses, but they also have other types of houses that were not at all similar to the ones that Adam Zertal discovered at El-Ahwat. And so Adam Zertal is looking at this architecture that he's finding, these round shaped houses, and he says to himself, this has to be a different civilization. It cannot be Israelite. It cannot be Canaanite. It has to be from somewhere else. And one day during his excavations, Italian archaeologists come to check this site out, and hear Adam Zertal's discoveries. And just like Joshua's altar, when he says, I don't know what this structure is, I've looked for parallels and I couldn't find anything. These Italians are saying to Adam Zertal, what do you mean you don't find parallels? We have parallels. In the island of Sardinia, we have these structures called norags, which really look like these buildings right here. And so suddenly Adam Zertal, gets this, slap on the face, a figure of speech, and he understands that what he stumbled upon was a Sardinian colony in the land of Canaan, in the land of Israel. And suddenly that he looks at the Bible and you read the stories in that area that's happening, and Iron Age, Sardinia, the name Sisera, and suddenly you understand what he found, what he stumbled upon, was not just any town or any city, but the town that is mentioned in the Bible called Charoshet Hagoyim, which was the city of no other than the Canaanite general, Sisera, who wasn't really Canaanite.
Yeah, he was essentially the military commander for Yavin, the king of Hazor.
Yes.
And the Sardinians were apparently among the group known from later Egyptian texts as the Sea Peoples, the Shurden or Shardana, who were willing to sell their swords to the highest bidder and set up a place there. Now, Harosheth Hagoyim, often in our Bibles, when we read study notes, will be translated as the forest of the nations or the forest of the Goyim. But there are others who've said, no, it means the forge of the foreigners.
Right.
One of the things that the tour guides pointed out while we were there was that they found iron, basically evidence of iron smithing, which fits with the biblical narrative. We read later that the Israelites in the time of Saul had to go to the Philistines to get their weapons sharpened because they didn't or weren't allowed to make iron on their own. So here you've got a smithy set up, which would make sense because that's how you outfit your soldiers that are in the service of the Canaanite king. Zertal was instructed by these Italian archaeologists, but he actually traveled to Sardinia then to confirm the theory for himself.
Yes, he did, and he saw these norags, these buildings, and immediately saw the similarity to his discovery in El-Ahwat. And again, what you see is this dynamic where an archaeologist comes to the field, he finds archaeological evidence that he cannot really explain, and then he goes to the Bible to get more information on that, and then that sheds new light and information on the site that Adam Zertal found. And so you understand that aside from the Israelites and the Canaanites living in the land, you had these nations of the sea that came into Canaan. Some of them were Philistines that we know from the area of Gaza and the 5 cities of the Philistines. But there were also other nations that came or apparently fled from the area, the Greek area, the Greek islands, the Italian islands, because of some sort of a cataclysm that happened in that area that made them flee. Maybe it was a drought, maybe it was a volcano. There are different theories about that, but we know for sure that the world that existed until the late Bronze Age went through a terrible destruction that some of it was definitely caused by the invasion of those sea nations that came into the land. And you read about it in Egypt. You read about it in the area of Lebanon today. The Hittite Empire was also badly wounded by this invasion of sea people. But what you see later on is you see that these sea people actually integrated into the Canaanite civilization that lived in the land of Israel. And Sisera, a Chardonnay, a person from the sea people, was part of the army of Javan or Yavin, the Canaanite city. And when you visit Tel Hazor, you see again a city that was one of the most important cities in Canaan, a city that was destroyed in a great fire. By who? And you see all the pagan gods and their heads that were cut down. You see how the area of the temple was destroyed in this great fire. And you see in the book of Joshua that definitely Hazor is mentioned as the central city in Canaan, and that's exactly what Joshua did. They burned that city to rubble, and the fire was so hot that it melted the stones and sand that was there. So again, we see how the archaeological evidence proves the historicity of the historical events in the Bible.
But after the destruction of Joshua, they apparently rebuilt, and it was then Sisera during the time of the Judges, which is about the time of what scholars call the Bronze Age collapse, when you had this mass movement of people from the Aegean, the region around Greece, and apparently the Sardinians, and another group that the Checker, who were equated by some with the group, the people called the Etruscans, basically showing up in Lebanon, in Canaan, in Egypt, and doing battle with the people who were there. And in the case of Sisera, wound up being defeated in battle by Barak, who had to be goaded into it by the prophetess Deborah. Interestingly, one of the things that was found is that Sisera's name is very similar to the name of an ancient regional capital in northwestern Sardinia, Sisari, which is very close to a site called Monte de Codi, which is a stone ziggurat, or with a ramp leading up to it, very much like the shape of Joshua's altar, which is something that is completely unexpected, but it's dated much older, probably close to 4000 BC, according to the archaeologists there. So there are a lot of interesting cross-pollination, not just between Egypt and Canaan, which we discussed previously, but between areas west in the Mediterranean and Israel as well.
And you and Sharon visited Sardinia immediately after your tour to Israel, or was it before?
It was, we'd been there the previous year following our tour in 2018. So when we visited Sisera's headquarters there, which is near Megiddo, we were able to compare the two, the neuralgic structures on Sardinia with the site of Sisera's fortress. And fascinating, again, that we had that culture, especially because there's some cross-pollination, some sacred sites on Sardinia, sacred wells in particular, that are related to the goddess Tanit, which was another name for Asherah, who is in the Bible. The thing is, according to the official story, the Phoenicians aren't supposed to have reached Sardinia until the time of King Ahab in the 9th century BC. But these wells are about 500 or 600 years older than that. So that certainly would fit the story of Sisera and his crew of mercenaries showing up in Canaan in the time of during the time of the Judges. The archaeology of Israel is fascinating. Why do you think it is important? Why do you find it so important to helping us better understand the Bible?
Because when you read the verses in the Bible, disconnected from the land, disconnected from the geography and the archaeology, there are certain things that don't pop out of the text that make you ask questions, you get a very one-dimensional understanding of the biblical story. When you visit the archaeological sites, this relationship between the geography and the Bible puts the biblical story in a totally different light, and it gives you a better understanding, a much deeper understanding of the events. And so when you read that there's a guy called Sisera, you never think that he is part of those, nations of the sea. You need the archaeology and you need the architecture to give you that information. You need to know that there is a city in Sardinia called Sisera to understand that they came from that place to the land of Israel as part of the invasion of the late Bronze Age. So, that's just one reason to come to Israel and visit those sites, and definitely read the book.
Yes. Adam Zertal's book, Sisera's Secret, just one of the 3 books by Professor Adam Zertal, published by Aaron Lipkin and Lipkin Tours. Where do people go to find the books and also the Hidden Israel series of DVDs?
You can visit hiddenisrael.net, and that will lead you to our website where you can purchase our Bible teachings and our books, and also register to the Skywatch Tour to Israel in 2022. And you can also visit skywatchinisrael.com to get there and get registered, and we hope to see you soon in Israel.
So, mercenaries from the island of Sardinia in the service of the Canaanite king of Hazor.
When you and I went through there, we were saying the same thing. We were looking to our guide and saying, Yishai, this looks just like the buildings, the building style on Sardinia.
So many clues there that fit, and it is really fascinating. I mean, strategically, you can see when you look to the west, okay, you get a clear view of the Mediterranean Sea, so you can see forces that are landing. So strategically, very important. Sisera,
and of course, he was making the iron implements, so he was the smithy.
Right. So, sadly, he was on the wrong side of history.
The fly loves you.
Sisera was on the wrong side of history, and so he got a tent peg in his head for his troubles. But
probably made out of some of the metal that he had,
it may well have been
in his smithy.
But it's one of the sites you can see if you join us in Israel next year. You'll find Israel, the information at skywatchinisrael.com. Oh, fascinating stuff.
You need to go with us because we go to all these archaeological sites. It's a tour that nobody else takes you on.
Exactly. And the whole point is to research for yourself with eyes on the actual sites, the Bible's greatest mysteries.